We're so glad that you could all be here. Please know that we are, recording the event. Yep, we are recording, so that it will be available for other Brown alums who are not able to join us tonight. Just to let you know a little bit about the format for this evening, we will enjoy a conversation with Linda for about the first half of our program. And then she will do a brief cooking demonstration before we entertain questions from our audience. Please feel free to enter questions in the chat at any point during our hour together, and we'll do our best to curate them for Linda, as well as include some of the questions that we got from your Eventbrite registration. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Linda Shiue. She is unusual in that while practicing medicine, she is also a trained chef, and she is bridging the gap between medicine, nutrition, and the culinary world. Linda is an internist at Kaiser Permanente, the director of culinary medicine, and the founder of Thrive Kitchen, which is located in San Francisco's Mission Bay. And, in her spare time, she serves as a board member of the San Francisco Marin Food Bank. And now she is the author of Spicebox Kitchen. Congratulations, Linda, and welcome. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thanks so much for that nice introduction, and welcome everyone. I'm really excited to do this event. I loved Brown so much. I would actually move back to Providence, which people from San Francisco never really understand, but I still really love it, and I still have a couple of professors that I keep in touch with. So as Jeannie said, I was class of 93. I was in the PLME, and I finished medical school in 98 because I took off a year in between when I did a lot of different things, including working in Sichuan province in China, and then just kind of doing odd jobs around Providence. So I spent like a total of almost 10 years in Providence, and I have been in San Francisco for the last 20 plus years since I came here for residency at UCSF. So I'm really excited that you're all here to share my new cookbook, Spicebox Kitchen, my first cookbook, which was a labor of love really for the last 10 years, but intensively in the last 2 years. And I don't know if anyone else here is a cookbook author, but if you are, you understand exactly what that means. But it means so much to me. This is actually probably the most exciting thing I've done in my life. And I'm really happy to share it with you, really happy that you're interested in it. So I thought before we get into the Q&A that I would read a very small passage from it, just to give you a sense of what the book is about, and because authors are supposed to do that at book readings. So I'm going to start with a little bit of a passage from the intro. So the best way I have found to make transitioning to eating more healthfully a joy is to bring in flavors from around the world. My food influences have always been global and wide-ranging, and I love the adventures you can have in your own kitchen just by exploring different spices. I believe that the best way to get to know culture is to sit down and break bread or roti or a bowl of rice or noodles with the locals. What I cook and what I teach in my cooking classes are recipes inspired by the people I have met from around the world. I grew up with parents from Taiwan, lived in Singapore for a year in college, and married a man from Trinidad. No matter where I'm cooking, I rely on spices to capture the flavors of a particular cuisine. And I'm never without my own spice box, otherwise known as a masala daba, which is the Indian spice box. It's basically a way to keep your favorite spices close by when you're cooking. I like to think of a spice box as a cook's equivalent of a doctor's bag, containing the essential tools to use in the art of cooking. Learning to use spices is the best way to add interest and vibrancy to simple home cooking. And as our first medicine, spices also play a role in our health and wellness. This cookbook shares my love for flavors from around the world, from my unique perspective and nutrition knowledge as a physician and professionally trained chef. Whereas most healthy cookbooks focus on nutrition over flavor, these recipes in my book celebrate eating for pleasure. At my table, food is meant to be savored. I won't prescribe you a diet, advise you to count calories, or tell you what to eat. I believe that our food choices should be personal. The best diet for one person may not be the best diet for another. I do recommend that everyone eat mostly plants for many reasons, including taste, variety, the environment, ethical reasons, and of course, health. My goal as a physician is to improve patients' health by inspiring them to cook more and eat more vegetables. My goal as a cooking instructor and recipe developer is to get people to love and crave vegetables by showing them the many ways to prepare them deliciously. So I think that gives a good sense of what this book is about. And we'll talk about it a little bit more later.
That's amazing. Linda, actually, can I just ask you to turn off the Spicebox Kitchen player?
Okay, you're gonna hear me shouting at Google. Hey, Google, off. Okay.
Thank you. I think one of the things that's so amazing about your cookbook is that it pulls from so many different geographical areas throughout the globe. And only right before this call did I understand that we grew up like within 50 or 100 miles from each other in Eastern Pennsylvania. Can you tell me a little bit about what sort of things you ate growing up and how you initially got interested in cooking? Was it as a child or sometime as an adult? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so our Eastern Pennsylvania connection actually came later when we moved several times, but we grew up in, I think, similarly, probably homogenous, somewhat rural environments. So I grew up on Eastern Long Island, on the North Shore, in Wading River, if anyone is from Long Island here, which nobody really knows about. It's a very small town. And in fact, I grew up on a street that didn't even have house numbers. It was basically Long Pond Road, rural route number 1, Wading River, Long Island, New York. And so I can't say I grew up with, you would not imagine that I grew up with any interesting diverse food. But the reason why we lived there, the reason why my parents made it there was because it was near a large national laboratory, Brookhaven National Lab. And because of that, my world was much bigger than it would have been otherwise, because we always had visiting scientists from around the world. And my parents would have potlucks periodically, a few times a year, and we'd have people from literally everywhere. And they would bring food, not necessarily from their own countries, but from some country. Like a lot of them had, as international traveling scientists, they lived in many countries around the world. And so like we would have, like I remember I learned to make samosas from a Japanese woman who had worked in India. I had learned about some sort of Swedish food from a woman from the Philippines. I mean, it was really that kind of topsy-turvy and crazy. And I think that was really what kind of formed my taste buds, because otherwise the food that we would have, I grew up with babysitters in town, would have been, kind of like Italian American food, Polish food, Jewish food. That's actually the food that everyone else ate. And my mother cooked Taiwanese food. And my best friends were always Jewish. So I grew up knowing a lot of Jewish food, but it was these potlucks where I learned about food from around the world. And I actually also took my first cooking class when I was 7 in a summer program that was on French language and culture. And so my first cooking class was part of that class, and I learned how to make quiche. So I've always loved food, I love food before I loved anything else, truly. And I love travel, I think partially because I grew up with an international family. We had to travel if we wanted to see our relatives, and that's just kind of formed who I am.
Did you, how did that love of food translate to your freshman year at the Ratty, I wonder?
I suffered. I really could not stand it. And I literally was only on meal plan that year. I got off as soon as I could, like literally the moment I could. And I remember feeling very sad having to eat in the Ratty, but I would, I made the most of it. There was always a salad bar. I would always kind of like put things together. And then there were things that I ate, and I think you would ask me or someone had put a question of what were some of my favorite dishes in the Ratty. And I can't really think that I had favorites, but there are 2 things that I remember having there that I'd never had before that still are in my memory from all these 30 years later. One was, there was like this Saturday night jambalaya. I don't know if anyone remembers that. And, it wasn't great, but it wasn't bad. And, a jambalaya is kind of like I'm actually kind of fascinated by the similarities between cultures and dishes in different cultures. So that's like the fried rice from New Orleans, right? It's like the fried rice or the pilau or the pilaf, or name your kind of rice and other stuff dish. Saturday jambalaya was that one. And then the other one I remember from the Ratty was turkey tetrazzini. I don't know if anyone remembers that, which is a casserole that involved like cream and sort of turkey and noodles and other stuff. And for some reason, those two like just stood out in my memory of things I ate in the Ratty.
Wow, that's rough. So it sounds like you sought fine dining elsewhere, either in the dorms or off campus or at restaurants. Can you tell us more about your alternative eating experiences while in Providence?
Yeah. I certainly didn't have the budget to have fine dining. I probably didn't go to El Forno until I was a little bit older, like when I was in med school and I was truly in charge of my own budget. And that was like once or twice. So the dining for me was really more exploring different ethnic cuisines that I did not have access to growing up. Starting with, there are a couple of Indian restaurants I'm sure all of you have been to, and there are still there actually. There is Kebab and Curry on Thayer Street and Taste of India on Wickenden. I actually think that from the last time I went back for reunion, which was like 3 years ago, that they were still there, which fascinated me because restaurants are, a hard business to keep alive. And then there was, I think it's called Cecilia's, a West African restaurant in South Providence. That was, that was totally new to me. And Apsara in South Providence, which is still there, but owned by different people now. Because I also went there. Apsara's is really special to me. And I'd love to see in the chat or hear from people in the chat of other people who kind of grew up in Providence eating at Apsara's, because we used to get there so often that by the end, they were actually just feeding us for free. I would order like one dish and they'd bring me 8. Because the thing about people who love food and love cooking is you love feeding people, and the people you love to feed are people who love food. And so that was very clear that I totally loved it. And they would just give me like this embarrassingly large amount of food and things that were not on the menu. I even got invited to family events like weddings, etc. And they actually catered the appetizers, the nim chow, which are like the fresh spring rolls, for our wedding, and attended our wedding. So yeah, I guess me and restaurants in Providence are pretty deep. We go back pretty deep.
I am really regretting not having known you while at Brown.
Now, actually, I'm still when I go now, I can have fine dining. When I go to fine dining, I get special treats in the kitchen too.
Yeah, I definitely want to hang out with you. It's funny because Kebab and Curry was definitely my first Indian experience, and Cecilia's West African was my first West African. Apsara's, for me, college was a very, it was when my first exposure to a lot of these international cuisines were. And so it's cool that it sounds like you had a similar experience.
Right, which is really surprising for the small city that Providence is, right? I think it had just a great diversity of food.
Although now I think probably our younger alums could tell us, I think Thayer Street is a lot more international than it had been when we were there. I hear there's a couple Korean restaurants maybe on Upper Thayer Street, and there's just a wider diversity of things that you can dine on there. But we digress. Can you tell us a little bit? You went to Brown knowing that you were going to be a physician, right? Because you were in the PLME program. Can you tell us a little bit about that, like how your journey toward medicine and how you decided on being an internist, and how your life experience up until then informed your choices in your medical career?
I think, like many children of immigrants, especially Asian immigrants, I was told to be a doctor from a young age. I remember having a Fisher's Price toy doctor's kit, doctor's bag, a plastic thing with a fake stethoscope when I was 5. And so I think it was ingrained in me. But it's not like I fought it. It seemed like a good idea to me. But I think like many people who go to Brown, who choose to go to Brown, had just very wide ranging interests. And I think it was always in my destiny that I would never just be one thing or just do one thing. So I studied medical anthropology, which was a small section within the anthropology department, which also tells you about my love of learning about other cultures and travel. And then I studied abroad in Singapore as a junior. And as I mentioned, I worked in China, in very rural China without plumbing for 6 months when after I graduated from college, which makes me some sort of Chinese folk hero because nobody wants to do that. And but all this time, I knew I was going to be a doctor. Like, so I think my parents were worried every time I left, like literally left before there was even internet to study abroad in Asia, that I wasn't coming back. But I knew that I would be a doctor in some way. And then I think I always knew I wanted to do primary care, partially because I wanted to not train for longer than I had to. I didn't want to go into a specialty, but it gave me the flexibility, and it gave me, and I just like knowing people, knowing about people, and that's what you do in primary care. A friend of mine who was a neurosurgeon said, "Oh, primary care is like a cocktail party without the cocktails," and I think that's not inaccurate, actually. To be a good primary care doctor, you just have to get to know your patients, and that's the pleasure of it. After you are somebody's doctor for 5+ years, you actually know them, they know you, and that's kind of like being an anthropologist too. So all of that kind of all goes together.
Yeah, I think my vascular patients were similar in that once you start taking care of a vascular patient, often
they're yours for a long time.
A relationship. And so how did you find yourself in culinary school then? Here you are, an established internist, enjoying your work, and then culinary school on top of that?
So, as I like to say, it only took 40 years between my first cooking class and when I went to culinary school. About 40 years, a little bit of an exaggeration. But it was because, actually, two things. One, I wasn't enjoying being a doctor as much as I should have at that time, which was 10 years ago, or when I thought about going to culinary school 10 years ago. And I also felt like I could be a better doctor. So I was, practicing primary care. Like other doctors who trained at the time that the three of us did, nutrition was like barely given any notice at all in medical school, and also not in residency training. And I found myself, despite like pretty, high pedigree training in medical school and residency, that when I became like a regular person's doctor in a private practice type setting, and someone said, rightfully, "Hey, I'm pretty healthy and I want to stay that way. What do I eat? How do I make sure that my cholesterol doesn't get higher like that runs my family?" I remember not knowing what to say, which was terrible. It was this crazy thing. I'm like, I'm well educated. I went to really good schools. I don't know how to answer your question. And so that kind of just, that ate at me. I just felt like, not like a fraud, but like, this is not right. But, for years, like I was the same as every other doctor. I didn't really know. And so didn't really have a solution to that until I went to a continuing medical education conference called Healthy Kitchens, Healthy Lives, which is held annually until the pandemic, in Napa at the Culinary Institute of America, and co-sponsored by the Harvard School of Public Health, which if anybody's in the culinary or medical world here, I encourage you to attend. It's fantastic. It changed my life. So that was in 2012. I went to it, and then basically you learn all the top nutrition science updates from the Harvard people, and you get taught and learn how to cook food from the amazing chefs at the Culinary Institute. And I thought, I love food. I love cooking. At that time I already had my food blog. I really should do this. It seems crazy to try to figure out how to inject this into my medical career, but like, it was like I had to. Like before that, I never really believed in a light bulb moment. I never really believed that people were, like struck by lightning. They knew what they had to do, but I knew. And so literally a week after that conference, I taught my first cooking class. I really liked it. And then I just started writing recipe prescriptions to patients. I wrote recipes for kale chips on my prescription pad. And I started teaching, learning how to teach in the community, in libraries and community centers. And then after a few years of that, I thought, I actually got good advice from a fellow Brown alum, Daphne Miller, who's a doctor who's done a lot of work in the food world. Food and farming is kind of her passion. She said to me at that time, she's like, you better set yourself a timeline by which you have reached your goal, because if not, and I found this actually like the best advice anyone's ever given me. If not, you're just going to keep going and you're not going to reach it and you'll be disappointed. And so I gave myself 5 years to reach my goal, which was to run a cooking program for patients, like a formal program that I would be paid to run. And so that was my goal. And so 3 years into that, I tried to set that up where I was working, and they weren't convinced because it's still a pretty crazy idea. And so I pitched the idea to where I work now, which is Kaiser, because it made sense. They had the first farmers markets at a medical center in the country. And so I thought, well, what they don't have is, what do you do with that food that you sell in the farmers market? So that's what I pitched. That was in 2015. And then, I got that job set up. And then I thought, I'm going to take some time off, because I hadn't. And I keep taking time off. I'd taken time off, to study abroad. I took time off before med school. I took time sort of off when I had my first daughter. That's not really time off, as any parent knows. And it was time for my next time off. So I told my soon-to-be boss, I'm like, can I start a little bit later? She's like, sure. You want what, 3 months? I'm like, actually, I need a year. And she told me afterwards, she's like, I didn't think you were coming back, just like my parents before. I didn't think you were coming back. But I did, because it was just sort of where cooking school fit into that. I went to San Francisco Cooking School, which is a 6-month program for career changers. So it was like made for someone like me. So that's what I did. And then after that, I used part of that year to actually, design the program that I was going to have to start working at when I actually started working in 2016. And so that brings us to where we are today.
Yeah, so the culmination of all those experiences, your career in culinary medicine, has now resulted in this amazing, just simply gorgeous cookbook. Can you tell us a little bit about how it's set up and how we should interact with it? Just tell us about Spicebox Kitchen.
So this cookbook is really like 5 books in one. And I didn't really want it to be this big. It's hefty. It's like 3 pounds. It's more than 300 pages. I really thought that I would want, just a bunch of recipes. But my editor, rightfully so, said, you are a pretty unique combination of knowledge and talents. And I think that if you really want to produce something that's uniquely yours, it has to be more than just a collection of recipes. And so the first section actually goes over, it's called Healthy Cooking 101. And it goes over basically everything you need to know on how to set up your kitchen. If you've never cooked before, you can kind of learn from this section. I go over what I think are the healthiest ingredients that you should have, which are largely plant-based. I go over how to choose them, how to store them, how to cook them. I go over spices. And the reason for that is that spices kind of bring flavor, but we're also our first medicine, as I mentioned. And they kind of are the kind of underpinning of how I flavor food throughout the book. So that's the first section, is Healthy Cooking 101. It will kind of give you a primer, even knife skills on how to cook. And then the following sections, that are 4 sections that go kind of around the world in different regions that mean something to me personally, and also have a tradition of plant forward or vegetable forward cuisine. So I start with California, and that's where I throw in my kind of Latin American recipes too, because that's when I learned more about Mexican food. Since I've been here for the last 20 plus years, I'll just show you some of the beautiful photographs from this. And I want to give a shout out to my photographer, Michelle K. Min. This is her first cookbook. She was awesome. She not only, took the pictures the way that I wanted them, but I think really she understood me and my food, and she captured the feeling. And my food stylist is Haley Hazel, also her first gig doing a cookbook. I went to culinary school with her. They're both young enough to almost be my children if I had children when I was 20, which is kind of crazy. But they were awesome. So if anyone is ever looking for a food stylist or a food photographer, hire them. They're just incredible. Anyway, so this is California that I'm showing you here. Each section also goes through not just breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but there's also sweet treats, because I do believe that treats belong in any healthy diet. And there's also a pantry section where you can learn how to build kind of building blocks of foods you can kind of mix and match. Because I think that I want people to cook at home as often as possible, but that doesn't have to mean cooking every single night. You know, people are busy. I don't cook every single night, but if you kind of plan ahead, you can have some components ready. So that's a very important part of what I teach in my cooking classes. And I do that in my book as well. So that's the first section of California. After that is Asia, which is obviously a very wide ranging region. A lot of it, these are my whole wheat scallion pancakes. So this recipe is another example of how I try to take things that people love that may not be the best for them and make them a little bit better. So in the case of, like, any baker will know, you can swap out half of your all-purpose flour for whole wheat and you'll have a similar texture, but this adds a lot of the nutrients and fiber that you have stripped out when you have refined flour. So there's, I go through a lot of Chinese and Taiwanese recipes here, but also some things from Southeast Asia from my time when I lived in Southeast Asia. This is for what I call my celebration red salad. It's just a really delicious salad that has a lot of different vegetables in it. I have Eat the Rainbow spring rolls. So this is a plant-based version of Vietnamese spring rolls. Some recipes from the Philippines. So some of these are inspired by my travels, inspired by cooking classes I've taken, inspired by things I grew up eating. And then the next section after that, I'll just show you this picture while I'm talking about it, is the Mediterranean and the Middle East. So I have the least personal connection to this region, but I do have some. But it's an important thing because the Mediterranean diet is one of the healthiest diets that we know of, that we have the most evidence for to prevent chronic disease. And then, so there's lots of regions, lots of cuisines represented in the Mediterranean. I threw into that the Middle East because the Middle Eastern countries also are part of the Mediterranean region and use a lot of spices. And when I was in culinary school, I staged at Murad. I don't know if anyone in the San Francisco area has been to Murad, but it's an amazing Michelin-starred Moroccan restaurant. And there were tons of spices there and I loved it. So that picture was for, it's actually a breakfast, but I would have this more of as a dessert treat for bagrir, which are 1,000-hole pancakes or crepes with honey and orange flower water syrup. So that's that third section going through Mediterranean recipes. This is a recipe from Malta inspired by one of my Maltese neighbors, actually. And here is a recipe from Iran for kuku sabzi, which is like a frittata. And then the last section, which I'll show you, goes to Trinidad, and that's inspired by my husband, who is from Trinidad. And the reason why I chose this cuisine is that it's not that well known unless you're from the Caribbean or possibly from one of the parts of this country where there are a lot of Caribbean immigrants, which is mainly New York and Miami, and hardly anyone else this far out on the West Coast. People don't really know the cuisine. And it's not necessarily known as a healthy cuisine, but the roots of Trinidadian food, which are partially from the descendants of slaves from Africa there, from Indian indentured servants who make up the other half of the population, and a mix of many other kind of people. The roots of a lot of the cuisines around the world are actually very plant-based. They've changed a lot as our diets have changed a lot too and gotten more modernized in bad ways, ways that are bad for our diets and ways that are not really true to the cuisines, where meat would be more of a flavoring or a condiment and not the main thing. And so plant-based food is actually what a lot of global cuisines are. And so I tried to do that by converting a lot of the recipes that I knew into being more plant-based. This is another, I guess I have a lot of pictures I'm showing you of bread. This is for a roti or flatbread there called basep shet. And again, I made this into a more whole grain version. This is a version of a corn soup that's popular during carnival time there. So that's what that last section has. The Trinidad section in particular has recipes for things like condiments and spice blends, because it's hard to get Trinidadian ingredients here, although you can obviously get anything online these days. But I have recipes so that you can make your own as well. So that's what the recipes are. And the theme, again, with all of them, after you get through the first section, that you can sort of get as much as you want out of it on how to cook and what's healthy to eat, or you can just dive into the recipes and just get some other flavors around the world, just to show you that I don't believe that there should be a monoculture on what healthy eating is, and that in our diverse society, we really should be actually looking to what other people have been eating for forever.
I just want to second Linda's claim that it's 5 books in one. It really is amazing. I have a lot of cookbooks and I'm not a cook. And this is the first time I've actually pulled out a highlighter and put like tons of Post-it notepads and things like that, because your cookbook really provides so much very helpful information. There are so many questions that came in about how we can improve our diet for healthier living, and you go through section by section, having really almost a dictionary or glossary of spices and vegetables and why they're important and how you can incorporate them, and really kind of pull it all together. And not to make it a total commentary on my opinion, but I was so proud of you, because you really, this endeavor really feels like a culmination of kind of what Brown is sort of supposed to, I think, feel very proud of, is that we bring together all sorts of disparate areas that and come at it from different perspectives, and create this fruitful product. So I just want to tell everybody, if we don't get to your questions, if you buy the book, you will be able to get a lot of your questions answered, and go through in really great detail what Linda really, her mission and how to put it into practice. And so I think, Linda, you're going to show us how to make a quick little snack.
Yeah, and thank you, Vicki. That was very sweet of you, really, truly sweet. But I do intend it to be something that's very helpful and pleasurable to cook from. And truly, for myself, even when I got it back, when I got the copy in my hands, I thought, oh my God, what did I do? How did I do that? So yes, it was a labor of love, and I'm proud of it, and I'm happy with it. So I hope that everybody will get a copy and see what we're talking about. So I'm going to demonstrate very briefly one of the recipes from the book, and this is for orange spice pepitas. I chose this to demonstrate just because, first of all, it's quick, but also that it's an example of the building blocks that I talked about that I include in the pantry section of something that you can make that can be used in many different ways. So this is basically just going to be spiced pepitas, which are pumpkin seeds. You can eat them alone as a snack, like you might snack on nuts. You can eat them, put them into trail mix or granola. I use them in the cookbook as a garnish for 2 different dishes. One is a roasted Mexican spice butternut squash soup, and the other is a dessert of pumpkin pot de creme. But you can really think of many different ways of using this. It's a great salad topper too. So I'm going to show you, without further ado, how we're going to do this. I'll show you the ingredients first. I'm going to try not to knock over my mic here, and hope that you can see what I'm showing you. I'll hold it up. First, we have our pepitas. Okay, so these are unroasted, unsalted, unseasoned. We just have a little bit of salt and sugar, a little bit of salt, a tiny bit of sugar. And then the 2 spices I'm using in here are ground cinnamon and cayenne pepper. So those are pretty classic, like Mexican seasonings. I'm just going to warm some oil. Normally, when I'm toasting seeds or nuts, I don't add oil, but I use them here. I use oil here just so that it can hold on to the spices. And then I'm going to just sprinkle the pepitas into the pan. And I think, can you see that, or do I need to angle the You see, okay. There's not much you have to see close up with that. So these are just going to roast in the pan. I'm just going to stir it through so the oil coats it a little bit more. You'll see that the seeds will change from their kind of olive green color into a lighter tan color, and they'll puff up a bit and maybe start to pop as they cook. So while that is going, I'm going to make our spice blend. So I'm literally just putting everything into a little bowl. A little bit of salt. Oh, that was sugar, actually. A little bit of sugar, a little bit of salt. For salt, one tip that I like to give is to use Diamond Crystals kosher salt. It comes in a big red box. It isn't very plain, uniodized salt. It has a pure salt taste. But the reason why I use it, besides the fact that it is kind of a pure salt taste that a lot of restaurants use, is that the way that the crystals are manufactured, it's less dense. It packs less densely into a teaspoon. So it's lower in sodium per volume, per teaspoon than regular table salt. If you don't use that, you may need to increase your salt a little bit in my recipes, or ideally you don't actually increase it and just get used to having a less salty palate. So this is the cinnamon I'm going to add into my spice mixture, and I'm just going to stir it together. Nothing fancy here, and just have that ready for when my pepitas are toasted. You can hear it start to pop a little bit here, I think. So let me talk a little bit about why I chose these, why pepitas actually. So for people who are nut allergic, most people can eat seeds, and seeds and nuts are a good source of healthy fats, monosaturated fatty acids, which are good for heart health. Seeds, pepitas in particular, and other seeds are a good source of zinc, which is good for our immune system. They're a source of protein, and they're overall, I'm turning the heat down because you can hear it start to pop now. I don't want to have one pop into my eye while I'm talking to you. They also have fiber. So like it's a healthy snack that you can have on hand. And if you make your own, even if it's seasoned, you're controlling how much salt and sugar and fat you're adding to it, which is what you don't have control over when you're buying prepared foods. So these are pretty well toasted now. I'm just going to take off the heat and show you what they look like. So you see they're lighter, they're a little bit puffier. Some of them are browned a little bit. So at this point, I'm just going to sprinkle our spice mixture and stir it through. And you want, this happened the last time I demoed it too. I just inhaled a little bit. It's like the cinnamon challenge of the cinnamon and the cayenne. Okay, so you're gonna coat all of those with your spice mixture, and then the last bit, which normally if you're doing this and not for time limited demonstration purposes, I would let them cool a little bit to add the last bit, which is some fresh orange zest. So oranges are now in season. They're really sweet right now. The zest of citrus actually has a lot more of nutrients than the pulp, more fiber, more vitamin C, but that's not really why I'm using it here. But just, to think that when you're choosing your flavorings and your ingredients, that they may also have health properties. What I'm using here is a microplane. So very useful to have, a very fine zester. If you don't have one already, I recommend getting one. It's good not just for zest, but for shaving nuts or cheese or any chocolate, anything like that you want to have very finely shaven. So I would normally zest the whole thing, but I think that's enough for this demo. So I'll just show you what that looks like. Just stir it through. The zest will dry up, especially since it's hot right now, but it'll still maintain its flavor. And it's incredibly fragrant right now. So your food, especially food that's good for you, needs to taste great, right? So nobody is going to eat a healthy diet just because you're supposed to. You have to love it. And so I am very flavor intense, flavor forward with all of my food. And this very simple recipe that just has a few ingredients is an example of that. And just, to talk about the seasonings for this, the cinnamon is one of the spices that we know quite a bit about from a medical point of view. It has been been shown to lower both blood sugar and blood pressure. And as a bonus to that, cinnamon is very, very sweet. So if you are baking with it or adding it to any sweet sweet treat that you're having, you won't need as much sugar because it's so sweet on its own already. So that's a bonus with that. And then cayenne pepper, which is basically, you know, a ground chili pepper. Here's my whole chili pepper, my whole cinnamon stick to show you where these ground spices come from. Has a lot of antioxidants. So chili is not just, you know, tasty, but it has a lot of antioxidants, and in some studies have been shown to have beneficial effects on metabolism, and possibly also prevent cardiovascular disease. So, but you don't have to think about that or know about all of that to enjoy this food. But if you want to, those are some of the details that I give in the beginning section of Spicebox Kitchen.
So Linda, the impetus for you incorporating this into your patients' regimen and prescribing them kale chips, how do you find that you can help to break, Praveen had a question about breaking the longstanding mental barrier to cooking, meal planning, and then going along with what you're talking about, incorporating a healthier diet, eating less processed foods?
So I think I like to approach it as, you know, every bite counts, you know, sort of one bite at a time, one meal at a time. I think it is kind of unrealistic for someone to feel like, I mean, but if they want to, they should. But for most people to do a complete overhaul of how they eat, which includes not just what they eat, but how they procure that food overnight, is not realistic. So if you never cook, I don't think you should say you should be cooking, you know, 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, although that's what many of us have had to do during the pandemic, not having a choice with that. But, you know, to start slow, start with saying, you know, I'm going to have a small goal of, I'm going to cook dinner a couple times this week. I'm going to try to plan those 2 meals for my grocery trip so that I have all the ingredients ready, just to take away that barrier. Planning is everything. You know, I actually plan 4 to 5 dinners per week, and I have kind of similar things for breakfast so that I know on that one grocery run that I'll have most of the things that I need. And I try to have overlapping ingredients. Like, let's say something I'm making needs a lot of tomatoes. I'll want to make sure that whatever else I'm making that week also might use up tomatoes, so that I'm not wasting food and I don't have to get a ton of different ingredients. Because I think that's a barrier for people, to think that they need to get the exact ingredients. So that's another message I give, that, you know, the first time you use a recipe, including mine, try to follow it to the T so you know what it's supposed to be like. But then after that, feel free, you know, not like with baking, but with cooking, you can really substitute. So if you don't have kale or don't like kale, substitute collard greens. If you don't have pepitas, but you have sunflower seeds, you can do the same thing with that, you know, and one spice can easily be swapped out with another. And so to think very kind of open-mindedly about that. And then in terms of how to transition to a healthier diet, same kind of idea. Let's say you know, my favorite patient or my favorite cooking student is the one who says, I don't like vegetables at all. I never eat vegetables. I only like meat. I love that challenge, which says a lot about my personality too. But because I know that there's a reason for that. So you have to find out the reason. Is it, you know, it doesn't taste good to me, or I've never had Brussels sprouts that aren't like stinky and soft? Is it I don't know how to choose vegetables? What is the barrier there? So that's the first thing to figure out. And then often it's, I don't know how to cook it. I don't know how to make it taste good. And, you know, the worst thing to do to a vegetable is to overcook it. You can't really go wrong with something raw. And then beyond that, cooking a vegetable lightly, whether it's in a stir fry, steamed, roasted, is a good way to preserve flavor and nutrition and texture. And I think if you have those keys, and then beyond that, get the next step of learning what flavors you like and how to make that happen pretty simply, you know, how to use spices, how to use acids like vinegar and citrus juice, then I actually think everybody can make healthy food taste great.
Great. Can you describe your title, Spicebox Kitchen, where the Spicebox comes from?
Yeah, so this is the Spicebox that it's named after. Hold on. This is the masala daba that I read about before, which is the Indian spice box. And you can see I have it filled. It has like several little different compartments in it and little spoons for various spices that you use. truthfully, I needed to have a name, and the name of my blog was Spicebox Travels. So you can look at that too. I've had that for more than 10 years now. It's a food and travel blog. But spices bring back memories of different cultures and places. So that's where the spices come from. And I truly have always loved cooking with them. I'm very curious about them. And so then I needed my next naming opportunity was for my Facebook page, which was the Doctor's Spicebox. And this cookbook initially was, so this may or may not be interesting to all of you, but my cookbook initially was supposed to be called the Doctor's Spicebox. But I really struggled with that. My editor wanted to keep that name because she said, I took you because you're a doctor who cooks. I'm like, I know, but I think the doctor part might make people think that the food doesn't taste good. I thought about this for a long time. I said it shouldn't, but I think this is a misconception that a lot of people have. It healthy, that doctor, that nutrition, that those are not good words when it comes to food that you want to eat. And so I pushed for it. I was like, there's got to be some other combination of these words, kind of throw them into a bag and pull it out. And so I'm like, a spice box has to be there somewhere, because we all agree that was a good name to have in it. And then I thought, what else? And what can go with that? And then I was like, my cooking classes, I call those Thrive Kitchen. What about the word kitchen? It's very unintimidating. We all have kitchens. It doesn't mean that you have to be a fancy chef. It doesn't have to be fancy at all. And so that's how the name came about. And it took a really long time to get to it, but I was really glad that I persisted, because I'm very happy with it. I think it captures what I'm trying to do with the book.
The spices, I think, are also what make the healthy food not taste like bland tofu and bland quinoa. But people have been asking about what oils you cook with, how to train your palate, sugar, and how to control cravings. Do you have any thoughts on those things?
Those are three really good questions. So I'll start with the oils question. I think I can see that. That's from Brad in Honolulu. Aloha, Brad. Oils. So healthy fats. Healthiest fats are fats that are actually just contained in whole foods. So things like seeds and nuts, avocado, etc. But people who are very strict about healthy cooking won't use any added fats at all. But I still really haven't found a good way, to my satisfaction, to use the cooking techniques that I know how to use and bring out the best in foods without a small amount. And by small amount, I mean like a teaspoon to a tablespoon for a recipe that feeds 6 people. And so that's the next step. What are the healthiest oils to use if you are cooking with them? Olive oil is a great one. It's used actually by the gallon in Mediterranean cooking. It has a lot of benefits. It has a lot of antioxidants, especially extra virgin olive oil. One of the downsides with it is that it has a lower smoke point. So sometimes you need to cook things at higher heat, for example, on stir fries, etc. For that, you need a neutral oil that doesn't actually start burning at a lower temperature. So for that, I'll use grapeseed oil or canola oil or avocado oil, or some examples. And then sometimes oils are used for flavor more than for cooking. 2 examples of that, or a combination of the two, are coconut oil, which a few years ago, everyone thought was a miracle food, and it's not. It's still a saturated fat. Quick primer, any fat that is solid at room temperature is a saturated fat. So whether it's butter or the fat on meat or coconut oil, that is still not the best fat for your arteries. However, a little bit, for me, I use coconut oil when I want to, it has a high smoke point, first of all, but also it has intense coconut flavor. And so I'll use that when I want to have things taste like coconut without actually adding coconut. You don't need, a little goes a long way. So I think those are the fats questions. And then in terms of sugar, how to train your palate to desire things to be less sweet. This is actually a really important point. One of the bad things with our standard American diet is that there's too much added sugar. There's too much added salt. There's too much added fat. That is actually, though, primarily in prepared foods, ultra processed foods. So by trying to avoid those, which once you start eating food that you prepare yourself, you'll be like, oh, that doesn't even taste good, then that will automatically decrease your palate's desire for intensely sweet and salty and fatty things. And then people often ask about we used to think that sugar substitutes, things like Splenda and NutraSweet and Equal, all those things, Sweet and Low, were better than having sugar, in particular if you have diabetes. But there is a problem with them. They actually are, you know, if any, first of all, I can't stand the taste of them, but if you ever have them, they're much, much, much more intensely sweet than actual sugar. And they definitely kind of train your palate in the wrong direction to want more sweetness. And so that's a problem. And there have also been some studies that have shown that by changing the microbiome, that it actually can lead to glucose intolerance. So
Jeff, do you want to eat soon?
somebody is off mute. So the opposite intention of the sugar substitutes is actually what they end up doing. So I would say cut out ultra processed foods, cut out sugar substitutes, or wean yourself off of them. And then when you use sugar, use it sparingly. You can definitely train your palate for both salt and sugar to want less of either gradually over time, maybe a month, maybe a little bit longer for some people, shorter for some people. But by, you know, kind of weaning off, tapering off, or tapering to a smaller amount, you can definitely get to that place. Sodium is, you know, too much in our diets too, again, mainly from processed foods. So I gave you the tip about using Diamond Crystal's kosher salt, which is a little bit lower in sodium than table salt. Also using salt at the right time, which I talk about somewhat extensively in the book, in your cooking, not at the table in a salt shaker, but, you know, kind of at the right times during cooking will give you what you want from the salt, the flavor and the enhancement of other flavors in your food, without just kind of the pure salt bomb. And so once you figure out how to cook properly with salt, you won't want as much either.
So how do you yourself make it easy for you to eat and cook and eat healthy? Are there staples that you have in your kitchen? Are there techniques that you have for when you come home on a weeknight? I know your book is the recipes are designed for weeknight cooking, or weekday cooking, but what are your tricks and tips?
So again, it starts with the planning. So making sure that I do have things stocked in my pantry. So that is one of the big things in that first section, how to stock your pantry. So what does that mean? Having a variety of grains, rice and other whole grains, and a variety just so that I have them. You know, they're shelf stable for a long time. Having a variety of legumes, so beans, lentils, etc., both canned and dried. You know, a lot of people are like, oh, canned beans, how can you eat those? But they're fast. And if you choose, I do want everyone to read labels, because you can say anything on a label. Low sodium doesn't actually mean anything. So always read the amount of milligrams of salt and compare brands when you're buying, and then rinse them again if you want to reduce that salt. So I have beans around, of course, I have all my spices. I have a lot of different vinegars. I love acidic flavors, and acids are another way to trick your palate into thinking you're having something saltier than it is. Kind of, it's cross receptors. So I have a lot of those. What else do I have? I have various noodles. Noodles and grain-based dishes can be a really fast weeknight dinner combined with other things. I have, what are other key things in my pantry that I have at all times? Those are kind of the keys. If you do eat fish, I have some canned fish also. Things like sardines. These are actually part of the Mediterranean diet. These small oily fish are really good for heart and brain health. So sardines, anchovies, etc., tuna. I have that kind of stuff in my pantry. I don't cook with it that often, but it's there. And then the things that I replenish, you know, so that I set up my weekly grocery list, and I kind of look at decide what I'm making, and then see what I have, take an inventory, and then make that list. And so I'm always replenishing produce, leafy greens, a variety of things, tomatoes, carrots, mushrooms, some root vegetable, cucumbers. Those are kind of the basic things that I have. And then the freezer is another place that you can stock. And so I have frozen fruit, mainly for my 17 or 16-year-old who likes to have smoothies all the time, but it's good to have on hand. And I have some frozen vegetables like peas, corn, and sometimes, you know, more obscure things like frozen black-eyed peas and okra. Not everyone has, but I actually always have those in my freezer. And then some, some things that I have from just like from the summer, I'll freeze myself to have there. So that's another kind of misconception about food that I always like to tell people, for people who find it expensive to buy healthy food. Plant-based food is actually cheaper, whether it's frozen or fresh, than buying meat. And frozen fruits and vegetables actually can have a lot more vitamin density than things that you have had sitting in your fridge for a while, because the longer something is picked from the ground, the less it has in terms of nutrition. So frozen fruits and vegetables are flash frozen at the time of picking. So they're actually very dense in nutrition.
So unfortunately, we're closing in on 8 p.m. Time flies, and I'm sure all the attendees, and we didn't even get anywhere near to all the questions that were submitted on Eventbrite when people registered. Again, I encourage everybody to pick up the cookbook. It's available at Omnivore Books in San Francisco, signed copies, and also Book Larder, which is a Seattle bookstore. They have, you can order online as well. And on Amazon, leave a review if you get it. And I'm sure that will help promote the sales. And pretty much any place else that you can buy books, Target, Barnes and Noble, and whatnot. We have a book giveaway and wanted to see if people in the audience or participants can guess what the protein was that shocked, maybe horrified Linda when she went to Trinidad and had dinner with her mother-in-law the first time. Is that the story? I don't have all the details.
But I don't know that anybody here will know this answer. But
we thought we'd let people guess, and then we'll pick either the closest answer or something else. So in the chat, you guys can put down your guesses. I see bugs as one, which is a good guess. Goat intestine is good. The other one. Linda, do you have anything to close out the talk?
No, just please buy the book, share it with someone that you think could use it. It was actually my literary agent who said she wanted me to write this book for her father-in-law who has diabetes and is a chef, and needed ways to change his perceptions of what healthy cooking could be. So that's who that's for as well. And then just follow me on social media, Instagram, Twitter at Spicebox Travels. My blog is Spicebox Travels. Facebook, the Dr. Spicebox. And if you're in the Bay Area, Thrive Kitchen cooking classes, you can just Google that. We're actually starting next week with virtual cooking classes, but they'll be hands-on hopefully next year. So that's all that I wanted to say about that. So I'm looking rats, termites, turtles. A lot of these are very challenging, but not right so far. Frogs.
Goat head. There was an alligator. There's a shark.
Alligator might be close, actually. It's probably closest to alligator. Do you think? I don't know.
I suppose.
Animal biological majors here.
Any biologists?
Right answer. Somebody has the right answer.
Man, somebody. Oh, great. All right, Mandy. Mandy guessed it. It was armadillo. Linda, do you want to close out with your armadillo story?
Sure. Yeah. So that's amazing, Mandy. I don't know how you came upon that. So armadillo is known locally as tatu, T-A-T-U, in Trinidad. And it's an example of one of the wild meats that people consider a delicacy there. It's like actually an honor because it's expensive to have wild meat, or it's hard to get, to serve to a guest of honor. So my first trip to Trinidad, when I met my mother-in-law for the first time, she gave me a curry dish. And she said, have you ever had tatu before? I was like, oh, I don't know. No, of course I had to eat it, right? And I'm looking at this thing and I'm thinking, what is that? I don't know what that is. Kind of looks like lobster tail. What are those impressions on it that are kind of squarish? And I ate it and I don't remember what it tasted like, but I didn't like the texture, but I had to eat it, took a long time to chew that first bite. So that is what is called a taste test.
Wow. That, that is a challenging start to a hopefully long and happy relationship. Thank you so much, Linda. This was a lot of fun having you here tonight. And, hopefully if there are future events that we can plan together, I'm sure that our audience would really appreciate it. So folks, if you want to unmute yourselves and say goodbye on your way out, please do. And thank you for coming tonight.
Yeah, I'd love to see your faces.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Maybe, Gina, you can send me the transcript of the chat and I'll try to answer questions at some point somehow. And if you get in touch with me on social media, I'll answer your questions too. Hi.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you.
This was a great idea for a Brown alumni event.
Oh, this is so much fun.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you all so much for coming. So hopefully you all cook something tonight.
Oh, should we try and do a gallery view? Oh, I guess we can always do a screenshot.
Oh yeah, let's do screenshots. Anyway, we'll catch you we can. It was great to see everyone here.
Mandy, are you local? Are you here in the Bay Area?
Yeah, I'm in Marin.
Oh, terrific. Okay. Between Vicky and I, we will figure out how to get a copy of the book to you. That's terrific.
It's very exciting. I'm excited. I'm not usually a vegetable person, so hopefully this will inspire me.
You're my ideal student. And how did you guess armadillo?
You know what? I just was thinking of gross things and like something kind of like a bug, but not a bug.
That's a good way to describe it. A very large kind of bug. Exactly. Memorable for sure.
Yes.
And I can send a signed book plate to put into your book also.
Oh, that's so nice. Thank you so much. And congratulations. This was fantastic.